Seches Chagiga Daf Chavav contains 5 small, quick Mishnayos and the Gemara's comments on them, and then lengthy comments on the last Mishnah, all on the topic of trusting Amaratzim when it comes to Tumah of Truma and Kodshim. So as we have seen, Amaratzim generally are not trusted. We assume that anything that's touched by an Amaratz is Tameh and that he is Tameh. We made exceptions to allow the Avod in the Beis Mikdash to go forward. And we've seen some of those exceptions so far. We trusted them if they say that something is Kodshim, that it is Kodshim, that they were shomer it, that they kept it properly tahar. We also saw that we only trusted them on the actual material, on the actual wine or oil that they said was tahar. We didn't trust them on the kli because we didn't need to trust them on the kli. So our first mission is going to discuss situations in which we do need to trust Amaratzim on a kli, and that's an area close to Yerushalayim where you needed a lot of kelim. Now, there was a lot of kelim required in Yerushalayim. We needed them to be able to store karbanos, to hold karbanos, to be able to store wine and oil in the sachim. And we needed a large collection of earthenware pottery kelim. We had to make sure that those were tahar. So as we've seen, we didn't trust Amaratzim that they were able to make things tahar, but we had to trust them in order to be able to get these kelim and to use them. Now, Rashi explains you could not make these kelim in or near Yerushalayim because they required a furnace which made and created a tremendous amount of smoke, and we didn't want that smoke to sully up Yerushalayim, therefore you couldn't make them close. You had to be able to buy them from Amaratzim close to Yerushalayim, therefore the Rabbanan made a rule that the Amaratzim are trusted when they say that a kli is tahar, and you're allowed to buy it from them. So the Mishnah begins by defining what is the zone close to Yerushalayim where you're allowed to trust Amaratzim, and the Mishnah says it's from Moedein and closer. Rashi explains Moedein is a village north of Yerushalayim by about 15 mil. From there and on in, the Mishnah says from Moedein ulifnim, from there and closer, they are trusted that the klicheres are tar, you're allowed to buy them from them. From Moedein outward, they are not trusted because there you could get klicheres, or you can make them yourselves from somewhere else. So you cannot buy them from Amaratzim. You cannot trust them when they say that they are tahar. Now, the Mishnah explains that this is true even if it's contradictory. You could have the same pottery maker who wants to sell his things. If he's outside of Moedein, further, you cannot buy them from him. You assume that it's tameh. If that same person comes inside Moedein, comes within, closer than Moedein, and he wants to sell it to the same Talmud Chacham, the same kli, here it's considered to be tar, and he's allowed to buy it again because this is a rule which we made, and it doesn't matter whether it's contradictory or not. That's where this zone, you could assume that it's a tahar, and this zone you have to assume that it's tameh. Okay, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara wants to know what is the status of Moedein itself. We saw that closer than Moedein is okay, further than Moedein is no good. You cannot buy there. What about in Moedein itself? So the Gemara says there are 3 situations in which you are not allowed to buy them. It's considered like it's outside. And there's one situation in which it's considered like it's in. The one in which it's considered like it's in is if the Talmud Chacham is coming close to Yerushalayim, he's approaching Yerushalayim, and the pottery seller is leaving Yerushalayim, and they cross each other in Moedein. If the Talmud Chacham doesn't buy it now, he will not have a chance to buy later, because he's not going to find anyone else to buy from, and he needs it now, because he's coming close to Yerushalayim. This pottery seller is leaving, and once he leaves, he's going to be out. You won't be able to purchase from him anymore. Therefore, he has to buy it now, and he's allowed to buy it now. Other than that, any other situation, it's considered like it's out, and you're not allowed to buy from him. So, if both the Talmud Chacham and the pottery seller are leaving Yerushalayim, then he should have bought it earlier when they were both they are leaving a Moedein area. He should have bought it when they were within the proper area. He didn't. It's his own problem. He should have gone back to buy it earlier. Also, he's leaving, so why does he need it now? If they're both approaching Yerushalayim, so then he'll be able to buy it a little bit later. Why does he have to make the sale in Moedein? Let him wait until he passes Moedein, and then he'll be able to buy it then. And certainly if the Talmud Chacham is the one who is leaving, and the pottery maker is the one who's approaching, there is no reason that he should be able to make the sale in Yerushalayim, in Moedein itself. Okay, now the Gemara discusses what type of pottery are the Amaratzim trusted on. So we only needed small kelim to be able to store things. We're going to have two machlokes in Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan over here. Reish Lakish says that they're only trusted on small kalim that can be held in one hand. That's what we needed to use for nesachim and to store things. But a larger klicheres, like a barrel to hold wine, they were not trusted on that. We didn't have a special rule that we needed so many of those inside Yerushalayim. Rav Yochanan says no, they were trusted even on large kalim. Now, are they trusted only on empty kalim or also on full kalim? Reish Lakish says only empty ones. Rav Yochanan says even full ones. Even if it's full with tamei liquid, Rav Yochanan says, you can still trust him that the kli itself is tahar again, because this is a rule that the Chachamim made. Now, Rav said though that Rav Yochanan agrees that if you're trusting an Am Haaretz, then you're trusting him only on the kli, not on whatever liquid is inside. So if you don't know the status of that liquid, you cannot trust him on that. Which just comes out a funny thing. You're able to assume that the kli is tahar, but the liquid that's in it, you will be mitame because it's in Am Haaretz that has it. So the Gemara says it's not a problem because we find many situations in which we have to make contradictory rules, such as the rule of things which are inside a sealed kli cheres. Kli cheres blocks tumah from its outside, and therefore it protects whatever's inside it, but it only protects food inside it. It does not protect other kalim inside it. So if you have kalim and food together inside another kli cheres, the kli that's inside is tamei, and the liquid and the food that's in there is tahar, and that's not something which is possible to actually happen, but because of the rules that we set up, that's how it winds up not a problem. Okay, now the Gemara discusses, we now introduce our next Mishnah. The Mishnah here discusses what happens if people enter someone's house. You have Amaratzim or other types of individuals who enter your house. Do you have to be afraid that they were matame your house? So the Mishnah discusses if tax collectors come into your house, or if thieves come into your house, the Mishnah says to return things that they stole. You can trust both of them to say, this we touched and this we did not touch. Therefore, whatever they say they did not touch is tahar, not a problem. It says the Mishnah, two additional halachos. In Yerushalayim, Amaratzim are trusted on Kodesh. The Gemara explain what that means. And the Mishnah also says, third halacha, during the time of a regal, during the time of Yom Tov, they're trusted even on Truma. And that contradicts what we've learned earlier. The Gemara will explain it. So the Gemara, first of all, discusses the first halacha. The Gemara begins now. First halacha we've seen was that the tax collectors trusted to say he didn't touch certain things. Gemara says they have a contradictory brisa. It says if a tax collector came into your house, this is a Jewish tax collector who works for the king, the entire house is tamei. That means he's not trusted. Gemara says it's not a contradiction. If he's coming himself, then he's trusted. If he's coming together with someone else, he's not trusted. Who's the someone else? That's a machlokes Amoraim between Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar, whether it means another non-Jewish tax collector who's with him, who he's afraid to not touch everything in the house to search for the money that he's trying to get. According to the other one, it said he's afraid of the king. He's not afraid of the other person who's with him. He's afraid that person will go report to the king. Says Gemara, what's the difference between the two opinions? Either way, he's afraid of someone. Either way, if someone comes with him, you have to assume he touched everything. Gemara says the difference is that the person that's coming with him is not a person who's chashuv enough to have an audience with the king to be able to report to the king. According to the one who says he's only afraid of the king, he doesn't have to be afraid in this situation because this guy's not going to do anything to him, and this guy can't report to the king. Therefore, there is no concern in a case like that. All right, now the Gemara discusses the fact that we've seen that a thief is trusted to say this is what he stole, this is what he touched, and everything else he did not touch. And again has a contradictory brisa that says that if thieves come into your house, your entire house is tamei, or at least everywhere where the thief went or touched is tamei. The Gemara says not a problem again. Here we are referring to a thief who did tshuva. As you can see, he came to return the kalim. Therefore, if he tells you he didn't touch certain things, then you could trust him. Otherwise, if he's not doing tshuva, you don't trust him to say what he touched, what he didn't touch. You have to assume he touched everything, and therefore it's all tamei. All right, next line in the Mishnah was that in Yerushalayim, the Amaratzim are trusted on a kodesh. What does that mean? So the Gemara says we're referring to kalim, referring to large. We're referring to kalim. We've said that from Modi'in, we learned earlier, they're trusted on small kalim. Now, the Gemara says here it means to say that they're trusted even on large kalim, as long as it's in Yerushalayim, and it's kalim that are containing liquids which will be used for nesachim, so that it is kodesh. Now, here the Gemara explains the reason why they're trusted on kalim. That's because you can't have furnaces in Yerushalayim. Next line in the Mishnah was that during a regel, during a Yom Tov, they're trusted even on Truma, to say that this Truma is tahar. So the Gemara says, what is the source for that? We've seen earlier that they're generally not trusted on Truma except for the pressing season. The Gemara says the source for this is it actually comes from a pasuk in Sefer Shoftim discussing Peleg Shebegiva, and it says Vayesef Kol Ish Yisrael El Ha'ir Ki Ish Echad Chaverim, and all of Israel gathered together to the city like Chaverim. Chaverim means Tamid Chachamim. So you see here the Gemara says Gezeres HaKasav. The Torah considers all of Yisrael to be Tamid Chachamim at this time, and the time was the time of the Regel. So again, there we have our straight up rule. During the Regel, there is no halacha that Amratzim are Tmeim at all. So that leads us to the next Mishnah, which says that what happens if somebody, a Talmid Chacham, opens a barrel of wine or oil to sell during the Regel, or he makes a dough in order to be able to sell bread during the Regel. So during this time, even though Amratzim are coming and they're touching and they're taking and they're measuring, you don't have to be afraid that they were Matame, the wine, the oil, or the bread. What happens though if they leave and the Regel is over and you still have some of it left over? So Rav Yehuda says you can still consider it to be tahar because at the time that it was touched, everyone was tahar because it was during the Regel and everyone has the halacha of being tahar. That's Rav Yehuda's opinion though, but says the Mishnah, the Chachamim disagree and they say no. Their touching is now tamei, retroactively. It was only considered to be tahar touching during the Regel. Now that the Regel is over, the touching that they did earlier was tamei touching, and therefore you got to throw the rest of it out. Says the Gemara, there was a machlokes between Ravi Ami and Ravi Yitzchak, which took place on the porch of Ravi Yitzchak Nafcha. There was Ravi Yitzchak Nafcha was the one in the argument as well. Question was, can we save it for the next Regel? During the Regel, that touching is tahar. So, in the opinion of the Chachamim, who hold that after the Regel is over, the touching is tamei, you should be able to save it for the next Regel, and then it'll be tahar again, and then you don't have a problem. So Gemara says, this was a machlokes of Ami and Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. One said it's tahar now. It will be tahar when the next touching comes. The other one said no. That touching is now tamei, and it was metamei it, and it's not going to change. Whenever you have to throw it out, you can't save it for the next Regel. Now, the reason that it was a tar during the previous Regel was Gezeres HaKasav. That Gezeres HaKasav no longer exists. All right, now the Gemara wants to say that maybe this is actually a machlokes Tanaim. So the Gemara quotes two brises. One says that if you have a case like this, you have a wine or the bread that you made, you can leave it for the next Regel, and one says you cannot leave it for the next Regel. So the Gemara wants to assume, both are in the opinion of the Chachamim that it's tamei when the Regel is over. One says you can leave it to the next one says you can't, and that's exactly our machlokes of Ami and Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. The Gemara says no, that's not necessarily the case. Maybe both are in the Mishnah themselves. One is Rabbi Yehuda who says that it's tamei, and one is the Chachamim who say that it's tahar. So the Gemara says, how would that work out exactly? So the Gemara says that the one that says you could leave it to the next one, that's Rabbi Yehuda, who says that it is tahar, and therefore you could leave it to the next one. The one who says that you cannot leave it to the next one is the Rabbanon, who say that it is tamei. So Gemara says, why would Rabbi Yehuda say that you leave it to the next one? He says that it's tahar all along, even afterwards. You don't have to leave it to the next one. So Gemara says, so maybe we'll reverse it. The one that says don't leave it to the next one, that's Rabbi Yehuda, and he means to say you don't have to leave it to the next one. And the one who says that you can leave it to the next one, that it's Rabbanan, who say that it's tamei now, but you can leave it to the next one, and then it'll be tahar again. So either way, we don't see from here the definitive source that there is two opinions in the Brisa arguing in the opinion of the Chachamim. Now we get to our next Mishnah, and this discusses what they did in the Beis Hamikdash after the Yom Tov was over and all the Amratzim left, and now you had a Tumah all over the Beis Hamikdash. So the Mishnah says, as soon as the Amratzim left, the Regel was over, they would table every single kli, nearly every kli that was in the Azar. It was a lengthy, time-consuming task, but everything became tamei, and therefore they were now metaher everything. Now the Gemara says, if Yom Tov was over and you're on Friday now, they didn't do it then. They waited till after Shabbos because the Kohanim had to prepare for Shabbos. They didn't have time to do the Tevilah on all these Kalim. The Gemara says they had to do a lot of work removing the ashes from the Mizbeach. All the Karbanos are brought over the Yom Tov, loaded up the ash mountain, and it had to be removed, and that was a big activity which took a lot of time. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says, even if you had Thursday and Friday, they still didn't have time to do it, and they would only be able to do all the Tevilah after Shabbos. Now the Gemara begins. The Gemara describes how did they do the tefillah. So the Gemara says every kli which was in the mikdash they would do tefillah on. The one that they couldn't do tefillah on was the shulchan, and therefore they would tell the Amaratzim, be careful not to touch the shulchan. Anyone who went inside, even Amaratzim Kahanim, that is, they were told not to touch the shulchan, because if they'll be mitami the shulchan, they won't be able to be mitaharit with tevilah. Now the Gemara explains the reason is because the shulchan has to be always where it is. It has to have the lechem apanim in it, tamid, always, and therefore you cannot pause and take it away and put it in the mikvah, and therefore they could not be mitaharit. Now the Mishnah continues, all the kelim which were in the Beis HaMikdash had replacement kelim. In case they became tummy, couldn't use them, there was another one ready to take its place. Everything in the Beis HaMikdash was susceptible to tumah, except for the two mizbechos, the outer mizbech and the inner mizbech, the one of copper, or the one of adama, and the one of gold. The reason for that is because they are considered to be karka. The Torah calls them adama, it calls them ground, and ground is not makabel tumah, therefore they're also not makabel tumah. The Chachamim say there's a different reason. Well, the first opinion was Rav Elazar. The Chachamim say there's a different reason. That's because they are coated. They are plated with metal. The outer mizbeach is plated with copper. The inner mizbeach is plated with gold, at least in the Mishkan, and therefore they were not makabel tumah because of the plating. The Gemara will explain how plating means that something is not makabel tumah, because it would seem to be the opposite, and they'll change the meaning of the Chachamim's opinion here. So now the Gemara begins with the Brisa. The Brisa says that they told the Amaratzim, be careful not to touch the shulchan or the menorah, because the menorah also could not be put in the mikvah. So the Gemara says, why does our Mishnah not list menorah? So the Gemara explains, our Mishnah simply says because the menorah did not have to be there 100% of the time. It doesn't say tamid. Well, it does use the word tamid to describe the menorah. The candles have to burn their tamid, but there, tamid, it doesn't mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Tamid there means every day, once a day. But as soon as the candles went out, they were able to take it and do tefillah in the mikvah. So therefore, our Mishnah holds that the menorah was not a problem. We could get the menorah to the mikvah if it became temple. We needed to. It was only the shulchan that we couldn't, and therefore we had to warn the Amaratzim not to touch the shulchan. Where it says, well, what is the author of the Brisa hold then? How come that Brisa says that the menorah could not be put in the mikvah? The Gemara says because the place of the menorah is described as nochach ha-shulchan, across from the shulchan. That means you always have to have the menorah there. Otherwise, the shulchan and the menorah are not across from each other. Our Mishnah holds that's not a problem. Just telling you where to put it. It doesn't mean that it always has to be there. All right, now the Gemara has a question. You're telling me that the shulchan could not go into the mikvah, and therefore, if it became a tummy, it was a problem. The Gemara asks, it shouldn't be a problem. The shulchan is made out of wood, and the halacha is that a wood kli is not metame if it's never moved. And that's learned from a pasuk that links wood kli to a sack, to a leather container, a bag. And it says, V'chol kli eitz, also it says in the pasuk, Gemara quotes, Gemara doesn't bring the pasuk, but it says, V'chol sher yipol olav mehem b'mosa mitzvah, V'chol kli eitz, oy beged, oy or, oy sak. So it connects these two. Just like a sack is a kli that is moved, it's movable. Gemara says further, it's movable even if it's full. It's still transportable. So too, a kli eitz, a wooden vessel, is only able to contract a tumah if it's small enough to be moved, whether it is full or empty. Now the shulchan is very large and was never moved. Therefore, it should not be makabel tumah at all. That's a question we want to ask. So why do we say that they have to say that to warn the Amaratzim not to touch them, not to touch the shulchan, shouldn't be an issue? Let them touch the shulchan, should not be makabel tumah because it's not moved. So the Gemara says, obviously, it is moved. And where do you see that it's moved? The Gemara says like Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish says that what they would do in the Beis HaMikdash is that they would lift up the shulchan, they would show it through the door to the Amaratzim, to the Am, to Klal Yisrael. They would show it to them and they would say, look how fresh the loaves are, look how much the HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you. The loaves of the Lechem Apanim are as fresh after being there for 7 days as the moment that they were made. As the pasuk says, "L'som lechem chum b'yom hilakol," on the day of hilakol, the day it was removed, then it is still just as warm lechem chum as it was on the day that it was placed there. Now the Gemara says it has to be this way because we have a pasuk that says al shulchan hatohar, the shulchan which is tohar. That shows that it has to be tohar, but it's susceptible to tumah. And again, the reason must be even though it's a large Kli 8, it's a large wooden thing because it was lifted, it was moved. And since it was moved, you don't give it the halacha of a Kli 8 which is never moved, because it was moved, and therefore it is Makabel Tumah, and they have to warn the Amaratim to make sure not to be Metameid.